Hey there, class kickers. In this episode of the Kick Some Class podcast, we're going to do something controversial. Let's go. Hey guys, Brian with the Kick Some Class podcast. This is the show designed to help you, the educator, kick some class, whether that is in school, at home, or in life. If you'd like more time with your loved ones, more energy, more impact in class, all that great stuff, then you are in the right place. Regardless if you are a new educator who is just trying to figure things out, or if you are a grizzled veteran and you're trying not to burn out, this is the show for you. We have tips, tricks, tutorials, and conversations kind of like this one that are designed to help you just to do that. So let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, guys. So in this episode, I am going to talk about something a little bit controversial. Have you get some tin foil and your pitchfork and your shovel? No, I'm kidding. But I want to kind of give you just this thought that stick around to the end and engage with me in some reflection to see how it can affect every area of what you do. So really, I just had this thought and I said, I'm sort of spitballing here, right? I'm still kind of mulling over these ideas and seeing how they impact me, reflecting on them myself. And so I'd really love your impact as an educator and what you're going through in life. And it was this idea that in our society right now, we have kind of this battle going back and forth between collectivism and individualism. And I'm not, my goal is not to get into the political side of all this, but basically the idea is that if you have an individualistic tendency, right, that tendency means it's about my freedom, my choice, what's best for me. And that does sound selfish on the front end of that if you don't think about that really I'm in charge of my life and I'm in charge of those with whom I influence every day. And so having this understanding of what's best for me obviously has some merit, right? We can go through some altruism, just doing what's best for others when it hurts us, but not all the time, or we're going to end up burned out and checking on my podcast, which hopefully would be not so great on the end. We want to get that on the front end. So the other side of this is this idea of collectivism, which is you are putting together your actions, your philosophy, your beliefs based on what is good for humanity as a whole, right? So as your beliefs tie into this collectivist ideal, and yes, it does have some connotations of socialism, communism. That isn't my point of the discussion. The thing is that we have this idea that every single one of us would do things that benefit others, right? So we take on certain limitations to our freedom, to our individuality, because they benefit the collective people that are around us. We do this in a family environment. And so does that hold true through education? That's kind of the point. Well, as I thought about this, the news media and politics would tend to want to polarize us in this idea, bring us into camps, fire up our emotions, and then we watch certain programs vilify certain people, align with certain people, donate to certain people. It's not really the point. But I do want you to be aware of this, because if this is a continuum between collectivism and individuality or individualism, that isn't there kind of this point that this would filter into education? So I read a tweet or post by a friend of mine just about how educators are receiving all this criticism today, and that's totally true and obviously unjustified. But in receiving the criticism, she made a point about that we are doing what is best in the classroom for these students when they become adults and they move out into society. And of course, that's the goal of a standardized education that's sort of like funded and put forth by the government, and regulated and all that stuff. But my question or my thought, thinking through this is this idea of, is that what we do all the time? Does our leadership in schools from the top down, and that means from policy to pedagogy, right? This is going from the senator, congressman, and the person with the pen and all the power, that they're the ones that make a decision, but that filters down into our state, that filters down into our region, that filters down into our district and our building, and then into our own classrooms. And so do we always do that thing that is good for everyone? Is that how our policy is set? So when you think about that, and then your individual practice, is the individual practice that you have in your classroom set more for all of the students in your classroom, Or are you individualizing that instruction? Or obviously, that's going to bring about some connotations to the IEP. And I'll just take you back in my educational career. So, this is year 24 for me. When I was doing my master's, there's a local kind of rock star teacher who was teaching some of the adjunct classes. And basically, what he said 20 some years ago is that he believed every student needed an IEP. And I kind of balked at that idea because I was thinking in the construct of special education, like, how is this ever possible? And now I see with technology, with the internet, with all of these edupreneurs, right? These people creating educational content online, that there's a possibility that you could provide an individualized plan, and a lot of teachers do for each kid in their classroom. So maybe you're engaging something like Nearpod or Edpuzzle or even Khan Academy, a great example of this, and how you're individualizing instruction for those kids at that level. In the high school, we have teachers that do a flipped classroom model, which essentially is like an online course in that the students can engage that material as many times as they want. And then when they come into the class, they have this feedback, coaching time with the teacher that fits them. And so kind of as I thought about this, I was like, we have been doing individualized feedback, or should have been doing individualized feedback for where a student is and where they need to go, growth plan, growth mindset, all that good stuff. But if we're not actually engaging in that, then we might find ourselves frustrated that kids can't do that which we're trying to push out to all the kids collectively. I had another colleague just this past week. He'd said something to me like interacting. He's fairly new in the classroom role. And he'd said, it's hard for me to see that some of these other teachers are angry and frustrated that a student is not where they expect them to be. But rather than slow down or reflect on their teaching to help that student catch up, they're frustrated and maybe punitive in some of their policy. So let me switch over to policy because that's kind of the idea that I want to get across with you guys today. And that is that since we only have control over what we do in our particular classrooms, it's like our pedagogy and choices that we make. What is it that you are doing to meet the needs of each individual student? And that's such like a buzzword kind of cliche in education, but if I'm teaching from the front, I'm probably doing something that is more on the collective side of the scale. When I'm walking around coaching students, I'm doing things that are more on the individualistic side of the scale. And so thinking about the needs of every kid, I think our own educational philosophy kind of plays into this a little bit, that how we think education fills the role in society. Do you think that you are helping parents prepare their kid for the challenges of a world that we can't predict? Or do you feel that you are influencing a cohort of students for the next society? And I think that's the shift. So as I'm going through this in my mind, I'm really thinking about how can I tend to be a little bit more on the individualistic side, thinking, okay, if I've always been frustrated by this idea to teach to the collective low middle. And some people may not like that, but this is how I felt. It was that I could really only teach my pace in the traditional way to kind of like the low middle, and I could supplement, or those kids that were really low on this spectrum could get supports wherever they needed it, right? This is sort of the traditional model, but we didn't have a whole lot for the upper end of kids until we could offer AP classes, accelerated classes, whatever. And then it was sort of the same system, but just in a different group. For me as a science teacher, I feel like our accelerated program really wasn't accelerated in pace. We just jumped a grade and then everything continued at the same pace in a way that was delivered to all of the students. And so just sort of thinking about how can we maybe think through education and think through how we carry out our classroom is just this idea of reflection here. Is what I'm doing in the classroom meant for all kids? And some activities I think should be. But is the activity that I'm putting forth, or the thing I've chosen in my delivery of instruction, my assessment of instruction, my development of skills, really aimed at the individual? And if it is, am I providing individual actionable, specific feedback? Now, devil's advocate here. What if we take this up a notch? What about the administrator? If there's any administrators or, PD people listening to this, are you providing those opportunities, that feedback at the individual level, or are we trying to do the same thing with everyone, right? So thinking about how we want to lead teachers to lead students, is that what we're doing as administrators, as superintendents, as policymakers? And so I'm curious, I said I'm spitballing here.
This is an institution of higher learning. I am your professor, and you're going to treat me with the proper...
Not that kind of spitballing, although, I don't know, sometimes maybe for education that would be appropriate. But the idea that I'm after here for your feedback is, what do you think? How often are you engaging in things in your classroom that maybe are collective? And is it right? Your homework policy? Grading, feedback, are we being punitive? Are we having a growth mindset? Is this about progress, skill building, and being successful in the world beyond for each kid? I don't know, just an interesting point of thought. So I mentioned at the beginning, don't grab your pitchforks, because here we are at the end. This has nothing to do with politics. If your brain went to politics, then maybe that idea needs some reflection for you, because this idea, every single one of us feed into a collective society. We need, and this is my opinion, you're free to agree or disagree with me here on this one, but the better that we serve the individual, that's going to filter into the idea of a society that is better, as long as we're developing character while developing individualized skills. And that's challenging to do, right? In a classroom of 20, 25, 27, 30, I don't know how many you have at each grade level, but the more students you have, the harder it is to have those coaching conversations with students about their character, their empathy, their plan, their dreams, their hopes, their, whatever they're going through, especially if we're constantly delivering a program of curriculum that is designed collectively and not individually. So how can we do that, right? Just a couple of last quick things. If you were elementary, so I'm middle school, high school, my brain tends to live there, but in the elementary building, are you separating literature or literacy, math, science, social studies, all of those things? And is that what's good for each individual kid or not? If we lump all those things together into a project or old school, dare you say, thematic unit, teaching kids the unity of those is more real world, maybe? Is that better? I don't know. So just run something by. This week as you're planning out what you're going to do, maybe you can run this filter on your plans, run this filter on your choices for homework, run this filter on your choices for grading, for feedback, and see, are you doing what's best for each individual kid? And if not, can you? Or is this what's best for everyone? And then how do you make sure nobody falls through the cracks on either end of that spectrum? Well, hey guys, that was Brian with the Kick Some Class podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you know a teacher that is really going through it right now, like most of them are, share this podcast with them, this video, and I hope that it helps them. And in the future, if any of our back episodes you can get at kicksomeclass.com/podcast, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.